Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat Podcast. Of course, in this edition, we'll be talking about everything Tottenham Hotspur and the January transfer window. Of course, it is now day 23 of the January transfer window. Spurs have done business early, which is great to see. And I'm absolutely great to see George Sessions back on the channel with me. Of course, Press Association journalist. George, pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Cheers for having me back on. And and we've already got signings to talk about in January 23rd, as you just mentioned. It's strange times to be a Spurs fan, isn't it?
George, the mood is just so different under Ange Postecoglou. Of course, you work for Press Association, you work for various newspapers before that, and I'm sure that everybody watching and listening have read one of your articles, because of course your articles go far and wide in the national newspapers. What is it like as a journalist right now, being in that press conference room with Ange Postecoglou? Of course, you ask him questions on a weekly basis. What has it been like these last 6 months?
Yeah, I've said it quite a few times to people, but he's just been a breath of fresh air. He really has. And, I think it's very easy to sort of look back negatively on Antonio's time. And a lot of it was negative, but not all of it. And he was very good with the press, actually. But it's just, from a journalist point of view, he's just absolute gold. There's always new nuggets that he comes out with on a weekly basis, it feels like, which is great. And it's really good to get someone, I guess, with his background and his story in the Premier League. It's not a normal trajectory, is it, from Australia via Japan and Scotland and various other really interesting different jobs as well. So it's nice from a Premier League point of view. And then as a Spurs fan, it's great to hear a manager talking with so much pride about being a Tottenham manager again, because that's definitely been lacking the last few years. And look, Ange is great fun. He's not always, happy, smiley, as I'm sure people see, and it can be a little bit, narky at times and tetchy, but I think all the best managers are like that. It's been great to sort of learn more about him over these last 6 months, and obviously watch the football that he's been producing. Because even though I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, I certainly didn't think it could be as good as this so quickly. And the exciting thing is, it feels like it can get even better. It's a long may it continue.
I was going to ask that, George, as a journalist who covers Tottenham Hotspur on a weekly basis, are you surprised yourself on how good these 6 months have been? Because it does feel extremely exciting. When you look at the transfer window, which of course we're going to come on to transfers, but when you look at the transfer window in the summer, when you look at the transfer window now, bearing in mind that no other Premier League clubs seem to be doing business and Spurs got business done early, are you surprised on how good it's been under Ange these 6 months? Because there were a lot of doubters, weren't there?
Well, I mean, who did Tottenham sell on the day before the Brentford Open?
Yeah.
Harry Kane. I didn't realistically think. I didn't think that Tottenham would be in a relegation battle, but I did think, you're taking out 30 goals. You've got a new manager there that's never managed in the Premier League. Half the team is not you. Well, he's not going to be able to play his style of football. There's a lot of factors there that it could be a recipe for disaster. And I think it's been so impressive, just how quickly he got all the players on board, really. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the players that could be leaving, but people that maybe necessarily you didn't think would be on board. PM or Højbjerg being one. Even he is someone that's completely been committed to this and tried his absolute best to play this completely new style of football, and it's really hard to do. To go from Antonio and even Jose's kind of low block and counter-attacking football to now be expecting people to be on the ball for 60-65% of the game is a real tough ask. And the signings were very, very good in the summer, and that's helped. But even still, I think I don't personally think Spurs are in a title race, but they're definitely in the top 4 race. Might even be in the sort of top 3 race, to be honest, if Man City and Liverpool do run away with it. And I definitely did not expect that. I would have taken 6th, I think, as a fan, and I felt like that was maybe being optimistic. I thought realistically it could be a 7th, maybe another 8th season, just because you're taking out Harry Kane's goals and it's such a big transition. So to have been top in November and then dealt with all these injuries, which is the extra context to it, you just imagine what it would have been like the last few years if Spurs had 12 players out, 5 of them, 6 of them first team players. You'll know what sort of football we would have been watching and what the sort of press conference would have been like. So for it to have gone the way it has and Spurs to be 5th and bang in there, given all the injuries, all the unavailability, it's remarkable, really. It's all. Ange almost couldn't have done a better job so far. And that's testament to him, but also the people behind him and the squad, of course, because they've, to a man, really, they've all been very, very good.
George, I completely agree with you. Before the season, I would have said that Spurs would be probably 7th or 8th at the end of this season. And of course, the fans have been absolutely delighted with what we've seen so far, and it feels exciting because what the football club and Ange Postecoglou are doing right now. You mentioned there that you don't see Spurs as title contenders. Bearing in mind what problems Ange has gone through in terms of suspensions, injuries, and like Harry Kane leaving, etc. What else do you think that Spurs need to be title contenders, to be right up there with the likes of Liverpool, Manchester City and co? And do you think that Ange will perhaps be focusing and planning for being title contenders next season?
Yeah, I think he will be, and he thinks Spurs are in a title race. He said it last week, I believe. Oh no, the Burnley game. He said Spurs are in a title race. I think there's a couple of things. I think it'd be great if Spurs can stay in the conversation until April time, just for the experience point of view, because this squad obviously don't have the experience of being in a title race or kind of getting close. And I think that's something that's clearly lacking. You saw that with Arsenal last season. Arsenal had a really, really good season. You have to give them credit, and they didn't have that experience at the end when you need it. So if Spurs can stay in the conversation until April, just that from that point of view, that'll be really good for the squad. But also, I guess it's the depth, isn't it? We've seen that with this run. You take James Maddison out, and although actually we've found Dejan Kulusevski is almost a perfect replacement in a way, you need that all across the pitch. And Richarlison's hit form now, but there's obviously still question marks over him. And you'd obviously want, all around the pitch, midfield, there's still a few question marks. So I think you just want more quality in all areas of the pitch. And I guess, there's probably the wide forwards is the next place where Spurs probably do need to go up a level. And maybe Timo Werner might be the answer for that. Maybe a player will be brought in this month that could long-term be the answer. But I think it's more, Spurs have got a very good starting 11, but it's more the depth now that you want to push on. And also you do want to bring in quality players that will replace Dejan Kulusevski I absolutely love, but it'd be great if actually he's not a guaranteed starter. That would show how strong Spurs' squad had become if that can be the case. So I think that's the next step. But there's been real big strides taken. And I guess the other factor with why I don't think Spurs are in the title race is Man City, really. Whilst Pep's at Man City, it's hard to see anyone not being the favourite. But in the back of my head, I'm sort of desperate for Spurs to be there when he does leave, because it's going to happen eventually. He's not going to stay there and do another 10 years like Fergie. I'd imagine the next 2, maybe 3 seasons he will go. So everyone else below needs to be there and ready to pounce when that happens.
George, of course, you're reporting on Spurs every week. Who are you writing the most about at the moment? Who are you enjoying watching, and who do you think that Ange Postecoglou is getting the most out of and perhaps improved the most since he arrived in the summer?
God, there's a lot of people to pick from.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. I loved watching Maddison during the first 2 months. I knew he was a really good footballer, and I was really excited when we signed him. Wish it had been a year, 2, 3 years ago. But to watch him up close, and I pretty much did every one of those first kind of 10, 11 games. Just absolutely phenomenal footballer, even better than I realised. And so I'm very excited to see him come back in, although maybe it might take him a little bit of time to get up to speed. But yeah, you really can go through the team. I mean, Mickey van der Ven was brilliant when he first arrived. Christian Romero also seems to have gone up a level, which is really good. And Vicario absolutely already become a cult hero, hasn't he? But I honestly feel like you could pretty much go through the whole team, really. I guess maybe unsung heroes. Pedro Porro's been really, really good and really consistent. A lot of the people I've mentioned have missed periods. Porro's not missed. He didn't start at Brentford, but I'm fairly certain he must have played almost every minute since. And he's been really, really good. And that's the player that we all kind of hoped was signed in January. And we didn't see enough of that during the second half of last season, but a lot of factors for that. But he's been absolutely brilliant. And Pape Sarr can be thrown into that as well. Pape Sarr and Pedro Porro are two players that probably Spurs fans really wanted to see a lot of during the second half of last season. And we either didn't, or when they were playing, it is in a team that was a mess. So to see them both now in a team where there's a clear structure and a clear identity, you're seeing how good they are. And they're both so young. So that's the thing. I think Spurs have got. I just read somewhere they're the fourth youngest team in the Premier League this season, and that's the thing. You go through this squad, and they're all a really good age. And that's the exciting part. You just think the ceiling is so high for this squad. Just obviously things need to go a certain way. Need to keep Ange. But yeah, there's been so many good performers, and you could literally go through 1 to 11, and there's very few players you can really criticise and say they haven't been good enough.
George, you mentioned those key words there. Need to keep Ange. That is exactly my next question. Of course, he signed a 4-year deal at Tottenham. But with the way things are going, and like you've just said, Spurs are building a very, very decent, dynamic young team for the future, not only for now, but for the future. Do you think there's any chance in the summer, perhaps, that Spurs may offer Ange a new contract? Or am I getting ahead of myself?
I don't think so. Famous last words when July the 31st, he announces a new deal. But no, I don't think so, especially because it was a 4-year deal. And that was a real statement of intent. Antonio got a 2-year deal, I believe, didn't he? Jose, I can't remember what his was, but it definitely wouldn't have been 4 years. You don't really see that anymore. So that was a real statement of intent that we are backing this guy. It is a project. And Ange has really accelerated the project. There was, I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Gary Neville actually mentioned him as a future Man City manager. But I might be talking a bit naively here. I wouldn't see him as a Man City manager. I feel like he's someone that wants a challenge, and he wants a club that's almost in his own image. He's had to work, non-stop, and he's come from the bottom, hasn't he? If we're looking at Australia in terms of the football pyramid, no one really rates Australian as a real football nation. He's worked and scraped his way right to where he's now in the Premier League and one of the best managers of the season. So I think he certainly feels at home at Spurs, and he's also got a lot of control at the minute. And that's something I guess not always that you feel like Spurs managers have always had, but it feels like Ange has got a lot of control with the transfers and seems to have really, really built up a quick rapport with the new technical director Johan Lang. So there's a lot of sort of pieces in place at Spurs now, which makes it feel like a really good fit. So no, I can't see him sign a new deal in the summer, but maybe if things are going brilliantly next season, Spurs would look and think, oh, well, at the end of this season, he'll have 2 years left. Let's try and tie him down even longer. I actually did ask Ange last week or the week before, that when it was for the Man United game, not if he could see himself doing a Fergie, but if he could see himself staying at Spurs sort of for a long time, because generally he's only been at clubs 3 or 4 years, and he's sort of laughing at house. Probably rightly so, because he's not going to turn around and say, yeah, I can see myself being here for 5 years, and then everyone takes the foot off the gas because they think he's there and he's guaranteed there. But I do honestly think this could be the club for him, where he does kind of make it at home. He does stay here a long time, especially if which is probably realistic, Spurs aren't going to win the title next season. Everyone would love that to happen, but it's probably realistically not going to happen. So it is going to be a building project. So at the minute, I think everything sort of points towards him staying at Spurs for a long time. But I'd caveat that by saying football is such a fluid and crazy industry. You never really know what's around the corner, but it does feel like everything's in place for him at Spurs at the minute.
George, you mentioned that key word there, control. Now, previous Spurs managers or head coaches haven't had much control because, of course, Antonio Conte said about club signings with the likes of Jed Spence, etc. What has changed dramatically, in your opinion? Is it all down to Ange Postecoglou? Because, of course, Daniel Levy, I just wanted to ask you as well, is he still involved actively in the transfers? Of course, you've still got Fabio Craschi still working at the club as a consultant. I just wanted your opinion and your take on what he actually does at the football club and what he's allowed to do and what he's not allowed to do. Of course, Scott Munn has come in. Johan Lang, as you mentioned. Of course, Spurs have changed the academy director as well, Simon Davis, chief scout, Rob McKenzie. There have been a lot of changes at the football club in the last 6 months. And, I know I'm going to say it again, to be in this position where everyone has got a massive smile on their faces and we can see the progress and we can see the future. There has been a lot of change, but who's actually in charge of what and who does what?
Well, I think the key change is there feels like a real structure to Spurs now. I think, probably as recently as, I guess, April when Fabio resigned, Daniel Levy was running the kind of, I guess, the football matters and Fabio Paratici was running the transfer matters. That was kind of how it was going. And I think, you do have to give Daniel Levy some credit. I think I don't know when, but I guess he's recognised that he can't be so hands-on and he does have to delegate duties, which is why Scott Munn's come in. And now Scott Munn is generally dealing with the football side of things. And obviously Fabio resigned, but part of that, the ban that he had, he appealed it to FIFA and FIFA have allowed him to work from a consultancy basis. He can't be involved in kind of running a club like he was before, but he can be a consultant. So, from that point of view, it's worked well for Spurs. And also Paratici's managerial appointment of Nuno wasn't exactly the best choice. So maybe it's better that he's not running things as he was. But so Fabio is obviously still working at the club. He would have had a big say in Vicario for sure. I think Maddison would have been probably, would have had a part of that, given how early that was, and given he'd only left 2 months before, he would have been involved in that. But the other new person involved is Johan Lang, and I think the big reason why I talk about structure now is because I think Fabio was running the transfers, but he also had a lot of people around him, kind of underneath him, that would essentially just report to Fabio, whereas and that was first team and youth. So I think maybe you could probably say the academy and the youth team kind of got a little bit lost in that period. So that's why, really key. You mentioned Simon Davis. Simon Davis is now overseeing the academy, and he's completely across that. But he'll be joined up with Johan Lang as well. And you mentioned Rob McKenzie, and all three of them will be reporting to Scott Munn, and then Scott will be reporting to Daniel. So it feels like now you've got a real clear structure. Whereas before it would have just been Daniel and Fabio running everything essentially. And I think with modern football, and especially the Premier League, there's just too much going on now to have so few people really in charge and at the top. And Spurs have got loads of the guy's name escapes me, but when Johan Lang joined, he took someone else with him as well from Aston Villa. It wasn't just Rob McKenzie. It was another guy that's very big on data, and I think that's a big thing that Spurs have now. I think that probably did start last season, but Spurs have really moved towards data-led. That's definitely in Johan's kind of repertoire. And as I say, Ange's kind of unprompted spoken quite a few times about Johan now and how impressed he was with getting. I think he was really behind the Timo Werner deal, and I believe I read Alistair Gold saying that Johan and Rob were in Italy to watch Dragocin last month before that deal got over the line. So I think the clear structure of Spurs now is that Johan Lang is the main man when it comes to the transfers, but he's got a lot of key individuals around him that also are supporting him. So rather than just being Fabio spinning loads of plates and and everyone kind of trying to fit in between. You've now got a clear structure and everyone's got a clear role, I think, which is key, isn't it? Because, you know, if with Fabio being the main man, as I guess he was, you know, people underneath him are not really getting, you know, much of a look in, or maybe they're not feeling as sort of praised as they should be for the job they're doing. And now it doesn't feel like there's one sole person. There's a lot of people, a lot of parts all sort of working together to get the car running, I guess.
Are you surprised, though, George, about the level of control now that Ange has got, particularly when other win-now managers, very proven managers, didn't get that control?
I guess so, but you know, with Antonio, I mean, I wasn't covering the club with Jose, so I can't speak so much about him. But with Antonio, you know, he did get a lot of players that he did want. He didn't get all the players he wanted. You know, Bastoni was a big one, wasn't he? You clearly wanted him and didn't get him. Got Clement Longley. But, you know, Conte did get Perisic. You know, Richarlison, by all accounts, was someone that he wanted. I'm trying to think now off the top of my head. I mean, Bissouma didn't use him, so maybe that's not as much. And obviously, Jed Spence is the infamous one. But then, you know, by all accounts, Antonio was in the meetings with Jed Spence trying to convince him to join. So it's kind of one of those. I definitely think Ange probably at the minute has got more control, it seems, than Antonio did. But then also, you know, you've got to give Ange credit from that point of view, because Ange said either last month or a couple of weeks back, I will give the green light to a signing. I'm not going to sign anyone that I don't want, because at the end of the day, the responsibility is on me. That's my signing, you know. So if anyone that comes through the building has got to fit my style of football, and that's what Antonio didn't do. Antonio allowed players to come in, probably because he needed a body, and a lot of managers do work like that. I think Jose probably would have been the same, but he'd allow that person to come in and then say, that's not the player I want. Well, Spurs have just spent X amount of money on that player, so you can't now get the other player that you want. So there's a little bit of kidology, I guess, when it comes to stuff like this. But I think Ange has probably gained control quickly, because he would have been heavily involved in the signings in the summer, where there was no director of football. You know, Johan Lang wasn't in by that point, and whilst Fabio was helping from the consultancy point of view, Ange was the new name in the building and had a big say over everything. And all of those signings have really hit the ground. You know, Mickey, Vicario, Maddison. You know, I'm forgetting people here, but they've all come in and done really well. And so you look at Ange and say, well, actually, look, he's sort of list of targets that have all come off, so we have to back him again. So this summer you go for Dragusin, or this window, so you go for Dragusin. And I guess Ange would have been the big driving factor behind getting those deals early. And, you know, I'm sure Antonio Conte would have wanted signings early. I'm sure Jose would have wanted signings early. But I guess probably the on-pitch results at those times maybe didn't meet. I mean, thinking back to last January, you know, it was very doom and gloom around Spurs. You know, come back after the World Cup and lost at home to Aston Villa. It didn't feel, you know, you didn't feel like Spurs were going anywhere. The previous January, Antonio would have just come in, and that was when Spurs were going through their crazy period of win, lose. So there wasn't that kind of real clear pathway forward that you could see. And that's the other thing, you know, if you need to trust the manager. You know, if you don't trust that manager is going to be there for the long run, you're not going to give him the players. I think that would have come into with Antonio for sure.
George, if I was to ask you the question, do you think that Mauricio Pochettino, Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte, do you think they were fully backed by the board whilst they were there?
I mean, if I'd say no. Even if he was going through one by one, I think Antonio would have been the most backed out of all of them personally. He clearly didn't get certain signings, but I mean, Poch went a whole season without signing the player, so certainly not.
518 days it was.
Yeah, was it Lucas Moore was the last one in the January, and then it was the summer, and then the following January. Jose, I'm trying to think. I mean, Jose obviously didn't get all the people he wanted, but he did get some signings, didn't he? You know, Højbjerg would have been one of his signings. Maybe Gareth Bale, not so much, but no, I don't think. But even now, you know, probably, you know, Ange probably wants. You know, probably in the summer, Ange wanted another centre back, but Spurs didn't get him. So was that Spurs not backing him, or was that just kind of realistic And also Ange lost Harry Kane. So it's, it feels like Ange's been really backed, but actually out of all of them, he was the one that lost Harry Kane. So yeah, it's hard to, no manager's ever going to be completely backed, but it certainly feels like right now Ange has been backed probably the quickest than all the other guys. But he's also shown very quickly what he can do. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand.
One thing, George, certainly in my opinion, I think that not only have we got good signings in and early in both windows under Postecoglou so far, but of course we're getting players out the door. Players are coming back and then they're going straight out on loan. We'll come on to these players in a second. But as I said earlier, day 23 of the window, we've got 2 players in, Radu Dragusin and, of course, Timo Werner. What have you made of these 2 signings? And do you think they're going to make that dramatic impact for Spurs from now until the end of the season?
Yeah, I really like the Dragusin signing. Read a lot about him, obviously seen clips as well, but that seems a really good sign. It sort of fits the mould, doesn't it, what we're trying to do, another Mickey van der Ven. And he, I think the Romanian Van Dijk, he was sort of been dubbed either back in Romania or by his sort of Genoa teammates, and he's got so many good attributes. And Ange said something a couple of weeks ago, it must have been again before the Man United game, about how there was a Romanian journalist actually at the press conference, and he asked Ange about 5 questions about Dragusin, and Ange is really good. And one of them was, "Are you going to now play 3 centre backs? And surely Radu has to start." And Ange took that in good humour, but actually, what he did say during one of those answers was that Radu actually allows us to kind of play differently, and also gives us a different option. And I don't exactly know what he meant by that, but instantly I did kind of think, well, Mickey van der Ven and Christian Mira are brilliant. But actually, if you're playing a set-piece team, by all accounts, Dragusin's a set-piece beast. You think, next time Spurs play West Ham, maybe you do put Dragusin in ahead of Mickey van der Ven, per se, just because he's so good in the air, and you're going to have an aerial bombardment, because Dragusin's brilliant with that. And I guess also, I don't personally think Spurs will be playing 3 at the back anytime soon, but Ange has done that before. And I think, if we're looking long term, Dragusin's definitely going to play loads of games next season. If we're assuming Spurs are in Europe, hopefully Champions League, but could be Europa League. And Spurs, look at all these top clubs, Man City, Liverpool, even now Liverpool have had injuries. They've all got 3 or 4 really, really good centre backs, and you just need that rotation, and especially with Christian's disciplinary record. Mickey van der Ven's had the hamstring injury, and there's going to be games. So yeah, Radu Dragusin, could see why he ticked so many boxes. Timo Werner, I think it makes a lot of sense in this window, with Spurs needing another forward option, and maybe it's not the month where you can spend a lot of money and get an absolute sort of elite player, especially in January as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I guess in that Man United game we saw, the pros and cons of Timo Werner, but I do think he will suit Ange's style of football, and I don't know. Part of me does think, when you look at his career, just before he joined Chelsea, he scored 20, 25 goals, but actually that's kind of the outlier in his career. Generally, he's kind of been a 10-goal a season person, playing out wide, coming in, assist as well. And you only have to kind of look at the reaction of the Chelsea fans. They, even though his record doesn't look good there, I think it's 10 Premier League goals and 56 starts, they really, really sort of have a lot of respect for him. And he was a key part of their Champions League winning team. So there's clearly a good player there. And I can't remember the exact figure. I think it was somewhere between 13 million or 17 million. It can be made permanent. I do wonder if he does well for these next few months, scores 4, maybe 5 goals, gets a few assists, you could easily sign him, and it's just a backup option when it comes to rotating players, because this is the big thing with Ange's football. He's not really had the options to do it because of the injuries, but when he first took over, and I was speaking to people at Celtic, they were saying, "I'll be ready for the substitutions." 60-minute, 70-minute mark. He always makes substitutions. He always brings players on because the relentless style of his attacking football just absolutely knackers people, and you need to make those subs to carry it on for a whole 90 minutes. And I think with Timo Werner's pace, and if he can build up his confidence again, he could be a really good option off the bench. I'm thinking I don't envisage him being Tottenham starting, left or right forward for the next 2-3 seasons. He's 27 now, so he's not exactly past it, but I just don't see him being that sort of type of player. But I definitely think he's got a role as someone off the bench, going forward if he's going to stay long term. And a lot of people said at the time it just kind of feels a no-lose deal that if he doesn't do well, Spurs haven't lost a lot because it's a loan sign and you can send him back to RB Leipzig.
George, of course, we know Ange Postecoglou loves a versatile player. Timo Werner can play on the left, play on the right and through the middle. From what you know of his days at Chelsea and, of course, RB Leipzig, what would you say his best position is? Because he must feel that he's going to get a lot of game time. And, of course, I think it's wonderful that you're bringing in a player extremely hungry because he wants to play in the Euros in the summer. So he's going to give absolutely everything, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I think wide left is generally where he's played. I think he was brought in as that kind of, he can play in that area. I guess at this point, Kulusevski would be on the right, Richarlison would be down the middle, Werner would be out left for this month, and obviously February whilst Son's away. So I think he's the kind of backup left option. And yeah, he's got a lot to play for. I mean, I don't think he'll get in that Germany squad. But especially, we're going to come on to the FA Cup. If Spurs can get through against Man City, then all of a sudden the games will kind of, come thick and fast, and Spurs will need to sort of rotate options. And if he can score a couple of goals in the FA Cup and help Spurs win, could go down as another famous German, Jurgen Klinsmann, if he can do that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of upside to that deal. And like I say, could go wrong. He might fail to score and play 10 appearances and no one remembers him in 2 years' time. But I think he'll do fairly well actually. And also it kind of gives Johnson a bit of rest. Now we are getting players back. Maddison hopefully back either for Man City or Brentford. So, and he's played a lot of games and got a little bit of criticism lately. A little bit of it justified, but I think. He's a young player and probably wouldn't have expected to play so many games in such a quick period of time. Now having Werner means you can bring him off the bench and give him 20 minutes, which might suit him for the next couple of weeks.
George, can you believe we last won the FA Cup in 1991? And of course, we face Manchester City, the European champions, the world champions, the Premier League champions on Friday evening. Haaland's back in training. He's going to feature, surely. And James Maddison's back in training. Hopefully he will feature. How confident are you that James Maddison and Haaland will play in this match?
If I was to put my mortgage on it, I reckon they'll both be on the bench, I think. I'm not 100% sure about Maddison. Obviously, I've seen this clip of him today. And he's clearly getting some sort of treatment on his ankle. But I did speak to a medical expert I know. And he was saying, that kind of, I'm trying to think of the terminology he used. I think game ready. I think he said it's just kind of a device that essentially pumps cold, water or kind of ice to the muscle or to the part of the body where it's strapped to. So that could be after his return to full training, but it could also be part of his rehab still. But Ange said 2 weeks ago that he should be returning to full training this week. And we saw with Richarlison, didn't we, at Man City, that he was on the bench when, I can't remember how fit Ange described him as, but he wasn't 100%. He come on for the last 5 minutes. I imagine, given it's a cup game, given it's a one-off, that Maddison will be on the bench almost no matter what, just as if you need to chuck him on for 5 minutes, even if he just has to take a set piece, then it's kind of worth it. And yeah, he'll be massive. You can just almost picture the kind of noise when he comes on for that first time. It's going to be like a hero's reception. And he's only played 10, 11 games with the club. But what he did in those 10, 11 games was so significant. And he kind of almost embodied the new Tottenham as well. So, they'll be really special when he does come back. And, they'll have potentially Haaland. They definitely will have Kevin De Bruyne. But it's going to be a great game. And I almost kind of like it. It's a Friday night. I don't from the point of view that, really the FA Cup, cheaper tickets, that's where kids should be getting to the games. but hopefully the mums and dads will let the kids come, have a late night on a Friday. But yeah, being a Friday night, it's going to be a really good atmosphere. And Man City don't enjoy it at Tottenham, do they? So let's fingers crossed that carries on one more time. I'll take it. I'll take it on Friday, even if we lose in the April game. I'll take it.
Well, of course, George, you journalists love some stats. 5 visits to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Manchester City, 5 defeats. They haven't scored a goal. And by the way, that game against City on Friday, it sold out so quickly. So I don't think there'll be many families there, because a lot of them were in the queue, and sadly they didn't get a ticket. But what is your hunch for this Friday? Do you think that Spurs will do it? Do you think that Spurs could perhaps go on to lift the FA Cup in May, because it has been such a long time?
Yeah, I dream of it every year. I really do. I say to everyone, I feel like this is the year we'll do the FA Cup. I think, I'm generally quite optimistic when it comes to Spurs. I don't know why, but I think if I look at it from that sort of lens, I think you do want to play a big team early on. I don't think Spurs want to play Man City at Wembley in the semi-final. I don't think that suits Spurs. You want to play them early. You want to play them at your ground. Obviously, Man City don't enjoy playing at Spurs, but that was under a very different style of football. But I do think it'll be a really good game. And if I was to be hard pressed, I imagine it'd probably be a draw, just the way it will bloody work. But I think Spurs will throw everything at it, and they'll take a lot of confidence from the Man United performance. Because the team have been completely wiped out with illness. Obviously, we mentioned missing 5 or 6 players. Madison, hopefully, is back on the bench. Bentancur looked brilliant in that game. Richarlison got another goal. Werner will be a little bit more up to speed after 2 weeks of training with the team. Mickey van der Ven and Romero should be 100% then if they weren't for the Man United game. So there's a lot of things in Spurs' favour, and I think Man City looked pretty ominous winning at Newcastle 2 weeks ago. But if we're being totally honest, the FA Cup is the bottom of their priorities. The FA Cup's probably the top of our priorities for this season. At least it should be, and it does feel like Ange. Ange has spoken before about how he used to be an 8-9-year-old, wake up in the middle of the night and watch the FA Cup final with his dad. So this competition means a hell of a lot to him. So I imagine he'll go strong. And if Man City do decide to tweak things, given they'll be playing the following midweek like Spurs, then there's every chance Spurs can get through. Managed a 3-3 draw at the Etihad with a back 4 of fullbacks. So
yeah.
Madison comes off the bench and it's the winner. I'll dream of that tonight.
George, of course, Ange Postecoglou went with his strongest possible 11 in round 3 in the 1-0 win against Burnley, which was an absolute delight for me, because the FA Cup means a lot to me, and I can't believe every single time I say that 1991 was the last time we won the FA Cup, which of course a record 8th time at the time. It just seems crazy all those years have passed and Spurs haven't won the FA Cup. Do you think that he will go seriously in every single round that we are in this competition, not only for this season, but perhaps in future seasons under Postecoglou? And in your opinion, earlier on in the season in the League Cup, when he made 10 changes against Fulham, were you, as a Spurs fan and a journalist, surprised by that level of, the amount of changes that he made? He come out and said that it wasn't a mistake. It was, he wanted to test players out. Do you think he made a mistake earlier on in the season?
I think he did. I think in hindsight, he probably would have made 6 or 7. That's certainly what I expected. I expected maybe 7 max, more likely 5 or 6 changes. I didn't think he needed to completely overhaul it. I think it was only Mickey van der Ven, wasn't it, that played the previous game at Bournemouth, I think it was, wasn't it? So, yeah, I felt like I understood why he had to make the changes he did, because certain players needed minutes. Lo Celso needed minutes, Højbjerg needed minutes, Davison Sanchez needed minutes. At that time, it felt like all those guys needed a game to sort of stay in the groove. And I think actually Spurs not being in that competition, albeit everyone has said, we haven't had a big fixture pile up, which is great because we've had all these injuries. actually the guys that then come in weren't kind of ready when they did get their opportunity. So if Spurs had carried on in the Carabao Cup, I think it would have helped for that period in November. But yeah, I think it was a mistake to make so many changes. I knew he would make changes. I understand why he made changes, but I think it probably should have been capped to sort of 6 or 7. But I think looking ahead to this one, I do think he will go strong. I really do. He kind of said a little bit similar to Mauricio. Mauricio Pochettino had that kind of famous quote where he says, winning trophies isn't going to, winning the FA Cup or the League Cup isn't going to change anything for Spurs. We need to go for the big titles. Talking about the Premier League and the Champions League, and I never really agreed with him until Spurs made the Champions League final, and I went out there and kind of experienced that whole, how incredible that was, and then I kind of got what he meant because it was such a big thing. People still talk about Tottenham being a Champions League finalist. They don't talk about Tottenham being a League Cup finalist from 2021.
Yeah.
But I do think, and Ange didn't say the same, but he did kind of say, if Spurs won the FA Cup 1-0 every round, playing crap football, that wouldn't actually mean anything for him. It's all about the performance and the progress and playing that style of football. But I do think it could be if Spurs can find a way through this game, especially with some of the teams that are already out. Arsenal are already out. One of Chelsea or Aston Villa will go out. I think there's another all-Prem game which is quite favourable. With Brighton have got somebody that they could potentially go out. Then all of a sudden it really does open up. And if Spurs could win a trophy, I have always kind of felt that actually Jose Mourinho was quite famous for doing it with Chelsea. And even going further back, Brian Clough always viewed the League Cup as an important competition to win, just to get the winning mentality in. So I think it'd be great if Postecoglou could go all out for it. And I do think he will. Even Spurs do get through that 5th round games a midweek. I think it's the last week of February. So I can't think what Premier League games would be in between. But I think regardless of who it is, he would still go strong because he's got a real affinity with the FA Cup, even though he's born in Greece and he grew up in Australia. It's a competition that means a lot to him. Means a lot to his family. So I think he will. There is kind of a symbolic meaning to it that maybe other managers wouldn't exactly have seen in the past, and they would have prioritised top 4. I think he'll do his utmost to try and win it.
George, the whole top 4 thing and winning a trophy, particularly the FA Cup. When you look back, days like Pochettino and Jose and Antonio Conte, they all made major changes in key cup games, which of course we ended up going out. Colchester, Pochettino took the likes of Ericsson, put him on the bench rather than getting the job done. They then try and put the players on to get the job done, and then of course we go out the competition. Conte made changes. Jose Mourinho made changes. It's frustrating to all Tottenham Hotspur fans because I think a lot of Spurs fans want the cup competitions taken seriously. Do you think, though, that Ange would have probably learnt from that with previous managers? Because I know, I watch every single press conference and, watch and listen to everything he says. And he says that he doesn't really take into account what's happened before. But him going forward as the Spurs head coach, I just feel like some manager needs just to come in and just grab the opportunity of trying to win a trophy like the FA Cup. Do you think that the club is more prioritising top 4 rather than a competition like the FA Cup?
I definitely think that's been the case in the past. The Conte one last season was, that was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back for me to make all those changes for Sheffield United. Yeah, because you've got Wolves away 3 days later, and you end up losing at Wolves away anyway. To have Harry Kane on the bench in that game, that was, I just couldn't understand that at all, especially with the way the season was going. I'm not sure. I don't think I'd ever say that that's kind of a club directive. The club are saying to the manager, top 4 is a priority. Don't worry about the FA Cup. I just think it's kind of been a subconscious thing that's been in the club for the last few years. And I probably understood it, maybe 10 years ago when Spurs were trying to be a top 4 club and they weren't a top 4 club. Now that they kind of have become a top 4 club, albeit the last few seasons a little bit more in and out, now the step is that you do need to win competitions. You need to be a winning club, not just a top 4 club. But Ange is very authentic, and I do think I don't think he'd bat an eyelid at what Conte, Mourinho and Pochettino have done. I honestly don't think he'd look at that Sheffield United and be like, "Oh, I need to learn from that." He'll have his own ideas, and he had his own ideas for the Fulham game in the League Cup. He had to give minutes to players. That was the forefront of his mind, as well as going through. But he knew he had to give minutes to players. I don't think it's quite that situation now. I mean, I don't. There probably will be times where he makes a handful of changes, but I don't think he's going to do anything like he did for the Fulham game. And obviously he can't for Man City. But if Spurs got through against Man City, and then they've got, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a random club that's still left in it. That's lower league. If Maidstone. I'm actually doing that game, Ipswich Maidstone, so I can't see Maidstone winning. But say all of a sudden Spurs have got Maidstone in round 5. I don't think he's going to make 11 changes. He'd still play a strong team. I just think he knows how important the FA Cup is, and I guess that's the thing. Maybe the Carabao Cup just doesn't have that level of importance. I guess understandably so to an extent, but all Spurs fans would take that as a competition to win. But yes, it's all eyes on the FA Cup at the minute. And I don't think if Spurs lose on Friday night, I don't think it'll be because they've kind of decided that they need to prioritise going for the league. That they'll be going all out to try and get through in that game.
George, before we talk about names either in or out, just want to ask you your opinion on financial fair play, because there's not a lot going on in this January transfer window so far with lots of Premier League clubs. Did you expect it to be so quiet? And, what is happening with financial fair play for those who don't really know a lot about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not the completely most clued up, but I've kind of read into the Everton case. And I believe, I certainly can't recall when he would have said this, but Daniel Levy did definitely mention this. It might have been in his Cambridge chat last year or maybe the year before, but he did kind of mention that, clubs, there's going to be a lot kind of more stringent financial control on clubs. And it's coming in. I think UEFA, he was talking about UEFA at that point, but UEFA's rules are now going to be kind of, sinking in with the Premier League and the FA's rules. I guess the general gist of it, from what I understand, is looking at the Everton case, I think you're allowed to lose 60 million a year, and they've exceeded, and then you have that over a 3-year basis. And I guess the issue, the good thing for Spurs is Spurs have just sold Harry Kane. So, they're all of a sudden there's 100 million there straight away that Spurs have taken pure profit as well. So from that point of view, it's, the profit and sustainability is not going to be a problem. But then also, the stadium is an absolute money spinner. And, it may be Spurs had to get through the COVID period to kind of get out the other side of it, because, they obviously had probably 18 months almost without, being full and being used to its absolute maximum capacity. But now it is. Spurs are always going to be, making, well, if they're not making a profit, but obviously they are, then they're definitely not going to be losing money. And a lot of football clubs are losing money. So, you would kind of hope over the next few years, if this kind of carries on, that, Spurs' stadium, which obviously a lot of sacrifice and a lot of effort went into building, can be the real game changer. And, I guess a club like Newcastle that have got these Saudi owners that everyone kind of fears will do a Man City, I guess they can't, because there is a limit to what they're actually bringing in, and they have to kind of cut their cloth accordingly, as we've kind of seen in this window. I think a lot of people thought Newcastle would probably try and spend their way out of trouble. It seems like they can't because of the finances, and potentially they're going to be selling. If it's not Kieran Trippier, it's going to be Miguel Almiron. So they're actually weakening themselves to kind of stay within the limit. I think Chelsea, are not exactly in the exact same boat, but Chelsea aren't going to be spending big money this month because of similar issues. So yeah, I mean, going forward, it feels quite positive for Spurs, but I do know the rules are going to change at the end of this season. I'm not 100% sure what they're changing to. I don't think it's going to be hugely drastic change, but probably will make some sort of impact, and it will be different to what it obviously is now.
George, Daniel Levy has had a lot of positive comments on the likes of Twitter, which I'm not used to seeing, in the past couple of months, certainly with this financial fair play situation right now. From the money from the concerts and all the other events at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, can you imagine, and is it going to be realistic that Spurs are going to have a lot more money to spend in future windows?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Spurs probably have, haven't they? The last, we look at the summer win. I guess look at the last 2 seasons. Spurs, the money has gone up, hasn't it? Obviously there was the year where there was nothing under Mauricio, but under Jota they started to spend a little bit more than what we had before. But if you think back to summer of 2022, Richarlison come in for 60 million then. Basuma would have come in, I think that was around 25 million. So Spurs kind of spent over 100 million that summer. Obviously this summer they spent around at least 150 million, maybe more than that. Can't think off the top of my head. Obviously that's caveated a little bit by Harry Kane. But then you've also had the Januaries where Kulusevski and Bentancur come in, Porro the year before, the year after. So yeah, I think Spurs have probably been kind of ready to do this, and I think again they'll go fairly big in the summer. I don't think Spurs are ever going to be a club that Man City. Did Man City spend kind of 75 million on Gavidal? Is a lot of money, wasn't it, on him? I don't think Spurs are ever going to be a club that spends 75 million on a centre back. But I think we are going to be a club that looks to now do a 50 million, a 60 million, which obviously have happened in the past with Lo Celso and Ndombele, but Spurs really got burned by those deals. But I think every summer, really, you should kind of expect, given the stadium and given all the extra revenue that's coming in, that Spurs are capable of going out and signing a big player. Whether that's a player that's up and coming, like a Mickey van der Ven, I guess James Maddison sort of kind of fits with a 40 million signing. Spurs are going to be capable of doing that, I believe. And I guess that hasn't been the case, hasn't it? If we go back maybe 3 years, maybe if we go back before COVID, obviously that, Tottenham had just moved into the stadium. So everyone was anticipating that, the season after we'll reap the kind of, the sows of our seeds. But then COVID come along and did obviously affect things. But now with touch wood, nothing like that happens for a long time. There should be more to play with, certainly from Ange's point of view.
George, of course, Spurs are being heavily linked at the moment, are in talks with Club Brugge about Antonio Nusa. What do you make of this potential signing? 18-year-old winger, one for the future. Lots of clubs seem to be looking at him at the moment. How confident are you that Tottenham will get this one over the line?
It's certainly the one that they want to do this month. It's, obviously Rado Dragusin and Timo Werner were kind of the first half of the window, and the second half has clearly been focused on him. I don't think I would panic too much that, I think it was sort of last week, wasn't it, when the talks were kind of that news broke, and it feels like nothing's happened since. But not every transfer is going to be blow by blow. And the Dragusin deal took, felt like it was actually a short period of time, but it felt like a saga, that, didn't it, at the end?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't sort of worry too much that not a lot's happened the last few days. But Spurs clearly want Antonio Nusa, and I can't remember if it was. I think it must have been in the summer, or maybe it was even towards the end of last season. Spurs were kind of mentioned, with Nusa as well. So it's clearly one that's been on the radar a long time. And he's a really exciting player, as you just touched upon. Scored in his Champions League debut, scored in his Norwegian debut. 18 years old, and got bags of potential. I think dubbed the sort of the Norwegian Neymar, I think, by his sort of club teammates. So I think if I was to sort of stick my neck at the line, I think Spurs probably will get this done. Especially with it being a loan to go back, that kind of suits Club Brugge. And I don't think, realistically, I don't think they're going to get they want 30. It sounds like they want 30 million euros. I don't think it'll probably be that, but they're realistically probably not going to get that from anyone else. Unless maybe a Liverpool all of a sudden come into the equation. But Newcastle were mentioned today, but I don't think they'll have that sort of money for an 18-year-old. And Chelsea had a bid rejected in the summer, I believe, last day of the window. But don't think he would be their priority. And again, I'm not sure. That there's necessarily going to have 30 million for an 18-year-old. So Spurs seem like there's certainly a lot of clubs that want him, but Spurs seem like they've got a pretty good run at it. And the way these things kind of work, I don't think any bids gone in yet, but the talks indicate that they're going to be moving towards that. And maybe this will be the one that is the deadline day deal that Spurs always seem to do. So I definitely think it's one, I think it probably will happen, but if it doesn't happen, I'd imagine that'll be one that they really want to get sorted for the summer at the bare minimum.
George, I want to talk about our record club signing. Tanguy Ndombele, of course, is out on loan at Galatasaray right now. The last couple of days, he actually got his first assist at the weekend for his side in his 17th appearance for them so far this season. But in the last couple of days, there are a lot of pictures going around online of him looking quite overweight. What do you make of the Tanguy Ndombele situation? Because clearly a fantastic player there. He's had a couple of loan spells. He's delivered very little at Spurs. When you think of that price tag, record signing at the football club. What do you think the future holds for him? Do you think he's going to end up coming back in the summer? Of course, Galatasaray do have a buy option, but it don't really sound like that's going to happen.
Yeah, he'll be back in the summer. I can always guarantee that. It's probably sad, isn't it? Really, more than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are sort of poking fun at him, and there's an element to it. He's a guy with supremely talented. Should be doing a lot more with his ability. Clearly not disciplined, but I guess we've seen other scenarios. You don't know what's going on with players. It's very easy to kind of judge it black and white. You don't know what's going on with him behind the scenes, but I guess what is black and white is he's clearly not made the most of his ability, certainly for Spurs and certainly for other clubs. I think realistically he'll come back in the summer. I would be almost, I'd say 99% Ange will not be running the rule over him. He's already done that. Clearly seen that he's not a player for him. So Spurs will be doing everything they can to get him out on the door. Probably on another loan because no one's going to pay the money. And what will probably happen is he'll leave on a free. What did he sign? Did he sign a 6-year deal? I think it would have been a 6-year deal. So he'll probably leave on a free 2025 and sadly probably be retired by 30, I reckon. Because if it's gone the way it's gone so far, you struggle to see a way back from that. You struggle to see where it's going to click and where he's going to find. Hopefully he does. Hopefully he does find a club where they can get the best out of him. But he's gone on a fair few loans now, and it's just not happened. And aside from a little period under Jose when he scored a really wonderful goal, didn't it? Sheffield United, and it just looked very good. That kind of COVID period when football restarted. Aside from that, we've seen nowhere near enough. And personally, I've always been in the camp when it comes to him and Lo Celso because they are chucked together. Signed the same summer, both record signings. I've always seen it in Lo Celso. I've always seen the potential in Lo Celso. I've always kind of struggled to see it with Ndombele because just kind of that lack of application, which you see on the pitch, let alone off the pitch. You have an idea of what he's like on the pitch with that kind of lack of application, so you can just imagine what he would be like day to day in the training ground. So yeah, I struggle to see. I don't see any redemption arc for Tanguy Ndombele, unfortunately.
George, you mentioned Giovanni Lo Celso there. I tell you what, another frustrating player. That there's a real player in there. Of course, he always delivers for his country. Injuries galore at Spurs. Do you think there's any chance of him leaving either this January or in the summer. But he done a recent interview in the Matchday programme and said how settled he feels now in England, and now he wants to play under Ange. He's very excited about playing under Ange, but with the amount of injuries that he's had, do you think that he may end up leaving Tottenham?
I don't think he'll leave this window. So certainly not. It's a tricky one with Giovanni Celso. I think a lot of it probably comes down to him. If he's happy being at Tottenham, probably being a backup to Maddison, so to speak. And, if Spurs are in Europe next season, he'll play plenty of games. Probably play 30 games. He might start 15, 20 of them. If he's happy doing that, and I assume at this point he's still going to be in the Argentinian squad because they really, really rate him, and understandably so. Really real key figure when they won the Copa America, and it was almost sort of a travesty that he wasn't fit for the World Cup, but didn't affect him in the end. But I think if he's happy being the kind of almost a Maddison backup, and Maddison's not going to play every game, next season. He's not. Most players aren't going to, just that kind of the way Ange's football is. You're not really going to get many that play every single minute of every single game. Mm. So there's going to be options for him. There's going to be opportunities for him. Sorry. If he's happy with that, then I imagine he will stick around because Ange does seem to like him. I kind of wondered if Ange would kind of put him, I guess, in the same bracket as Eric Dyer and Højbjerg. After he'd had those injuries during the first half of the season, but we kind of saw it with the Aston Villa game. Really good goal, and again at Man City, we have seen glimpses of Lo Celso, and I think probably Ange can see that. And it's maybe a case of making him durable enough to play Ange's style of football. But clearly, there's a talented player there. Probably not. He's probably never going to realistically justify his price tag. But you almost kind of need to forget that now and just view him as a component in this squad and what he can do for this squad and how key he can be. And like I say, certainly if Spurs are in Europe next season, he's someone that would probably suit Europe. Actually, football's been back in La Liga, hasn't it? Or certainly on the European stage, international stage. So, I think as an option in Europe, as a player off the bench, it certainly could work. It's just whether he's happy with that. I don't think, fitness-wise and I guess the options in front of him, he's going to be a first-team starter in Ange's team. So if he's happy staying at Spurs, and it does seem, as you say, you mentioned that the programme, he's done an interview as well with Christian Romero just been published over the last few days, and again seems really, really happy at Spurs. And I know clearly Barcelona do want him, Xavi do want him, but Spurs are not going to loan him out now. No chance. And Barcelona don't have the money to sign him on a permanent. So yeah, he'll be here for the second half of the season. And I do think, there's a decent chance he could stick around for next season as well.
George, one other player who seems very happy at the club right now is Emerson Royal. He's had opportunities under Ange Postecoglou because of the injuries and suspensions that we've had. You even mentioned that Manchester City game at the Etihad where he played centre-back. A £20 million offer has been rejected from Al Nassr. Al Nassr apparently are now interested in Aaron Wan-Bissaka of Manchester United. What do you make of this situation, and can you see Emerson moving on in the summer? Because if I was to ask you as well, do you think he could play in that Pedro Porro role?
Yeah, when I did see that news about the rejected bid, I understood why it was rejected, but I did kind of think, how much does Emerson fit in long term? He's certainly been a valuable squad player this season, playing centre back as you mentioned, and also played left back on a few occasions.
Yeah.
But he can't do the inverted fullback role as well as Porro, as well as Udogie. I guess, is that so bad if you've got Udogie on the other side? And he's the one that's really doing it, and Emerson's trying to do it, but maybe not doing it as well. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, but I guess moving forward, if Tottenham want to be a title-winning team, you kind of need two guys in every position that are almost the same level. And at the minute, it certainly feels like Pedro Porro is a step up on Emerson. So maybe in the summer that could be one. I think Spurs, Spurs would have sold him last January, I think. If there'd been any offers, I think they would have sold him last January. And in the end, it was Matt Doherty that was the one that went. But they needed to get rid of a fullback then with Porro coming in. And he's kind of, managed to, build a, he's had a redemption arc. Because I remember the game when, kind of got booed off, didn't he? I think that might have been Aston Villa. And that was quite sad, actually, for Emerson at that stage. And it felt like there was no way back. Sorry, it was the Leeds game.
He has improved, though, George, hasn't he?
He certainly has improved. But I guess, for 25 million, it's kind of what you want. Porro was a similar kind of, price range, really, a little bit more than that. But we see what Porro brings. It never really felt like Emerson can do the same in the final third.
Yeah,
and even though he's been very valuable for Ange from a versatility point of view, I'm not sure he's 100% kind of suited to Ange's football. So while I don't see him going this January because there's a lack of alternatives at right back, I think that could be one in the summer that if a similar type of bid comes in, then it would make sense. And then obviously it leaves Spurs needing to get a fullback, but not the worst problem to have, I think.
George, before the January transfer window ends on the 1st of Feb, 11 p.m, do you think that Bryan Hill will still be a Spurs player?
No, I don't think he will, no. I think he's one that is disposable. Needs to be, that any deal would need to be right for him and the club. I don't think the club are just going to accept a loan again. I'm not even sure the club would accept a loan with an option. I think there'd almost have to be an obligation in there, but Bryan Hill's been at Spurs, since 2021. He's had loan spells away, but, that's a lot.
Are you surprised, George, that they've never loaned him to an English club?
Yeah, I'm a little bit. I did wonder last season if that would be the one that would make sense. Send him to Crystal Palace, send him to a team like that, send him to a Bournemouth. But I think he's just not strong enough. We see that every time he comes on. And I feel reticent to say that because clearly a really, really talented player, but certain players just can't hack it in England because it is a physical league. And also it's the speed of the league. When I say physicality, I mean that as, not just in terms of his strength, the speed of the league. It's such a fast-paced league. And you do see with Bryan Hill and other players at Spurs to an extent sometimes. Lo Celso can be in this category. Sometimes they just want one touch too many. And I think he's had enough chances now. I know he's not had a real run of games, Bryan Hill, but we've seen enough cameos to probably know that I don't think he's going to be the answer. So I could definitely see, a Spanish club coming in, loan deal with an obligation at the end of the season. I think that would make a lot of sense. Especially when Spurs get the players they're going to get back. He's going to kind of struggle to make the bench, let alone get minutes. This is a talented player that will forge a really good career. He'll be a very good player in Spain. Probably do fairly well in Italy, I think, as well. But just don't think the Premier League is suited to him. So I would expect him to go before the window shuts.
George, what have you made of the Pierre-Emile Højbjerg situation? Another player that doesn't really suit Ange ball, but of course, when called upon this season, he's acted professionally, done extremely well. Saudi clubs are apparently interested in him. Do you think he's still going to be a player at the end of this window? And I think, although professional, I think it says, it's written all over his face that he doesn't want to be at Tottenham.
It's a little bit similar to Bryan Hill again. That Tottenham are not just going to accept any loan deal for him. I think there needs to be a real, either permanent or it needs to be a loan with an obligation again. But I don't see him leaving this window just because of the situation Spurs are in. I've loosely been following the African Cup of Nations. I'm not 100% sure what the situation is like with Bissouma and Mali, but I know Pape Sarr's gone through. So Spurs are still going to be light of central midfielders, and obviously Maddison's coming back, but you don't know what kind of condition he's going to be like. So I just struggle to see Spurs letting him go. unless they bring the centre midfielder in, which could happen. I don't think that will happen personally. Certainly not a first team ready centre midfielder who's going to be part of the first team squad. But no, I think Højbjerg stays and then probably gets his move in the summer. He'll have a year left then, I believe. His price would have come down, because I think that's the thing. Spurs have been holding out for a big fee, haven't they? 25 to 30 million was mentioned in the summer when Juventus and Atletico Madrid were involved. I think Fulham as well. And Spurs as a Premier League club probably expect that, but the rest of Europe don't have the money of the Premier League, so it's always going to be a struggle to kind of get that type of fee. So in the summer, if he's got 12 months left, then that fee will come down, and it will be one that's sort of more doable. Like I said, the only way I could see him leaving is probably if Spurs went all out for Conor Gallagher. I think that would be the only way. Spurs would sign Conor Gallagher and they'd let Højbjerg leave. But I don't think either of those things will happen.
Do you think that deal has legs, George? Either, well, it's probably unlikely in this window, but in the summer, would you say Conor Gallagher? Can you see that happening?
Definitely has legs. If things had fallen in place on the final day of the window, he would have been a Spurs player. It was pretty close. Højbjerg was kind of being held back from going because there was talks between Chelsea and Spurs. Didn't happen in the end because probably such too big a deal to do on the final day of the window. But a lot's happened since then. Gallagher's really, really established himself as a Chelsea captain, actually, whilst Reece James has been away. And I'm a little bit conflicted about this. I watched Conor Gallagher for a season at Palace when I was covering Palace, and he was unbelievable at times that season. Really was. Scored either double figures or just below, but box to box. So much energy. I can 100% see where he'd fit into Ange's team. But I think it's a lot of money. There was 50 million was being talked about in the summer. That's a lot of money for someone that, is he going to be a guaranteed starter? That's not. You can't say that for sure. Now there's still developments to go with this because he's entered the last 18 months of his deal, and we've seen with Mason Mount being a prime example. Chelsea get twitchy feet when a player's entering the last 24 months, 18 months, especially the last 12 months. They almost make a decision. If you've not signed a new deal when you've got 12 months left, you will be sold. You have to be sold. So if Conor Gallagher continues to sort of hold out and not sign a new deal over the next few months, then he definitely will be up for sale in the summer. And a little bit similar to the Højbjerg situation, his price tag will not be 50 million. It would come down by a decent chunk. It'd probably still be 30 million, but I think you probably would pay that for Conor Gallagher. I really do think you would, because he's got a very high ceiling, and you can see exactly where he would fit into Ange's style of football. It's just a strange deal, certainly in January, for a number of reasons. The fact that he's essentially the Chelsea captain with Reece James out, and Poch clearly likes him. Although what I would say is I feel like, and results on the pitch haven't been great for Poch, but I feel like if he really, really wanted to keep him, he could make that call, and he clearly hasn't made that call. So that's a little bit telling. So while I don't think this will be one that happens this month, almost 99% sure of that, I think it's definitely one to watch in the summer because, well, it's one to watch in the summer, assuming that Conor Gallagher doesn't sign a new deal. Once he signs a new deal, that's it. That's dead in the water. But if he doesn't, then Chelsea will want him out, and Spurs and Ange definitely will want him.
George, you spoke about Brian Hill and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg there, saying about if they go out, Spurs would want some sort of option to buy at the end, an obligation to buy at the end if it was a loan. With Reguilón and Tanganga, are you surprised that they were straightforward loans? Because they're going to come back.
Yeah, I'm not. On the basis that Reguilón, you had to get Reguilón out. You couldn't keep him really at Spurs because there's a number of left backs anyway, and clearly doesn't fit Ange's style. So that was one where you just want to get him out. And Tanganga obviously had a horrendous time out in Germany. And again, for him, I don't think necessarily he's got a future at Spurs, but you just, from a kind of club care point of view, you need to get him games. So I think, a lot of people probably thought he wouldn't go as low as Championship, and certainly not as low as a sort of a team in Mill's position, and not exactly fighting for the playoffs or the top positions. But he just needs minutes, really does, because he's had nowhere near enough for the last 2 years, and it's hugely stunted his development. But yeah, with those two, it's different scenarios. They weren't in the building, so Ange has not really got a space for him in the squad. Højbjerg and Hill, they are in the squad at the minute, and they will be used if needed. But they're also probably, they're coming towards the end of their time at Spurs one way or another, and a loan weakens Spurs. Not as much Hill, more the Højbjerg situation. If you loan him out, then you're weakening yourself, albeit only for a few weeks until Sarr and Basuma get back. But you're weakening yourself, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be gone at the end of the season. So I think that's why Højbjerg and Hill have to be obligations now. You can't just do another loan. There needs to be something concrete at the end of that to move them on for good.
George, is it likely that Leeds United are going to pay Spurs £15 million for Joe Rodon in the summer?
I mean, again, this depends on things, isn't it? Let's say Leeds do go up, then yeah, there'd be front runners to do that. But then you're probably going to get, there's going to be clubs after Joe Rodon in the summer. Whether it's Leeds, whether it's Leicester because they're the club that have come up, whether it's Luton because they've just stayed up and they're now looking at a new centre back. There's going to be clubs after him, so there's no guarantee for Leeds. That's why I think that's personally one to keep an eye on this window, because it would make a lot of sense for Leeds to sign him this window. Even if they don't get promoted, they see him as a really key player. He's been excellent for them. The fans absolutely love him, so it would make a lot of sense for them to try and get him now, and then you kind of completely negate any chance that there's going to be a real bidding war, I guess, for him in the summer, because it does feel like there will be. And I'm pleased for him, actually, because I always kind of wanted to see him get given a go under Mourinho, not so much with Conte, once Romero had come in, but I certainly always wanted to see Rodon get given a go under Mourinho, and he never did get a fair crack. So I'm pleased that he's getting a run of games now, and I think by all accounts he did pretty well last season at Rennes as well. So he's a decent footballer, obviously not Premier League top six kind of level, but I think he could definitely have a Premier League career, whether that's with Leeds because they come up, or whether it's someone else next season.
George, what do you make of the situation with Jed Spence? Of course, he got sent back from Leeds. Daniel Farke was far than impressed with his attitude at Ellen Road. Of course, now he's gone out to Genoa. They've got an option to buy in the summer. What do you think will happen there? Do you think this is going to be a player now going to take an opportunity and the club are then going to buy him, or do you think he's going to end up back at Tottenham? And what do you make of the whole club signing saga under Antonio Conte with Jed Spence? Do you think he was actually given a chance at Tottenham?
He wasn't really given a chance under Antonio, but in hindsight, with everything we've seen since, the way his loan went at Rennes, by contrast to Rodon, obviously the way the Leeds loan has gone, maybe you can understand now why Antonio didn't give him a chance. I certainly think he could have given him minutes during that first half of last season, especially when Emerson was going through such a struggle. Wouldn't have hurt to give Jed 20 minutes off the bench, a bit more regularly. I think he's only played 30 minutes for Spurs, hasn't he? But clearly there is sort of underlying issues there as well. Certainly heard about the timekeeping. I think I read that he was late to the meeting with Daniel Farke when Daniel Farke was telling him that he's going back to Spurs. I can't remember who mentioned it, but hopefully in a way the Genoa move can work, and maybe it can be a similar case to Marcus Edwards. A young lad, very talented, clearly, and wanted opportunities, but wasn't getting them. And maybe discipline-wise, he wasn't 100% a professional off the pitch. But he went abroad to Sporting Lisbon and went to Holland before that, actually. But it's really worked for him abroad. Change of scenery, getting away from London, getting away from England has really worked. So part of me hopes that similar can happen with Jed. I mean, if the kind of, professionalism side of things weren't such a big issue, you do wonder how he would be in an Ange team. But I think Ange has probably seen enough of him in the summer and heard enough back from Leeds to probably have sort of, he said he was going to give everyone a crack, and he did, really. And he's kind of gave Jed, looked at him in the summer and has realised that's not one for him, which is a shame because clearly a really talented player. I guess the only thing, and I think I probably got, wrapped into this as well as fans and probably other journalists, he only had one good season in the Championship. It wasn't like he was playing in the Premier League. And when you're not in the team, you become a better player a lot of the time. So, maybe those calls for him to come in and be our saviour, because it felt like he was perfect for the Conte, wing-back system. Maybe we're just looking at a player that is Championship level, maybe low-end Premier League.
I wanted to ask, George, I know obviously you're at Hotspur Way for all of the press conferences and other events to do with Spurs. When you talk to people and you hear things, when so many reports have come out and so many journalists have said that he's got a bad attitude, have you known that? Have you been told that by people at the club that he's got a bad attitude? Because when you look at Ange Postecoglou, and he's come out and said many times, he does these FaceTime calls with signings, and he's so hands-on. He likes people's personality. He likes people to have, be very driven, very focused. Jed Spence doesn't seem or appear to be like that. And all the reports that you hear and read, one of the recent ones I read from ESPN stating that playing loud music, didn't turn up to meetings on time, etc. Very similar to what you've said. Have you heard any of that? Is that true?
The bad attitude, I don't know if I'd categorize him as that. Maybe that's not necessarily fair. I think it's certainly the professionalism that you want. When we think of an ultra professional, everyone will instantly, when it comes to Tottenham, thinks of Harry Kane. Kane was unbelievable, from the smallest detail to the biggest detail. Now, not everyone is going to be like that. It's just the way humans are. Not everyone's the same.
Yeah.
But you want a young player that moves up from a Championship club to the Premier League to be more like that than less like that. And I think Jed falls in the latter category where, those kind of fine, the sort of small margins, the 1%, he's probably not doing enough of. I wouldn't sit here and say I've heard he's got a bad attitude, but I just would say that there's small things that he needs to improve, and the timekeeping clearly is one. I guess probably taking on instructions would be another one, but that's more linked to his time under Antonio, and Antonio's instructions were very specific and and a little bit regimental. So not everyone's going to sort of flourish under that, as we've seen with other players. But yeah, clearly he needs to. His career was on an upward trajectory, and it's now the last sort of season and a half is going the other way. And hopefully this loan move can be the time when it clicks and he sort of realises what he needs to do to be a professional at the highest level, because there's a lot of talent there. But like I say, he's just got to do the other work if he really wants to make the most of that talent. And if he doesn't, he won't be the first talented player not to have made the most of their potential.
Yeah.
Thousands of people have not made the most of their potential, but it would be a real shame because it seemed like a very good signing, but did kind of go downhill from the moment he was labelled a club signing. And Conte does deserve a slice of the of the due, really, for Jed not making it so far.
Yeah. George, last couple of names I want to give you, and just give me your opinion on whether you think that Spurs could possibly sign any of these. Today, reports have come out. Serhou Guirassy of Stuttgart, Santiago Jimenez of Feyenoord, Joshua Zirkzee of Bologna, 3 strikers. Any truth in any of those? Do you think any of those could happen?
Say the first one again. Is that the guy that's at the African Cup of Nations now? Is it
Serhou Guirassy of Stuttgart?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, I did hear that last month, but no, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think he's like 27. As I say, I believe he's at the African Cup of Nations now. So I'm not really sure. That doesn't really kind of sink in with what Ange is looking for.
Would you see Richarlison moving on in the summer and Spurs signing a new striker? Would you see that happening? Because, of course, there has been interest from the Saudi League. I know, of course, Richarlison scored 6 in his last 6 Premier League games. We seem to be seeing a different Richarlison now. But with Harry Kane leaving, of course, in the summer, do you think that Spurs will get another striker in either in this window or in the summer?
I think Spurs will definitely sign another striker or a forward player, I probably should say. It could be Nusa in this window, but that's not necessarily for now. But in the summer, Spurs will definitely be looking for a real forward player that can go into the front 3 positions. I think Richarlison's still got a chance at Spurs. I really do. I did always kind of think that he suited a lot of Ange's football. If you look at the player that's played centrally for Ange at other clubs, they're not actually really a Harry Kane type. They're not someone that drops deep and gets involved in play. It's someone that's kind of minimally involved in the play, completely pressing, harassing, so much energy from the front. But then he's a very, good finisher in the box. Now that's kind of been the thing that's let Richarlison down. But, Richarlison does seem fit now, and I think that genuinely has made a difference for him. And also off the pitch, it seems like he's got things in order and he's in a much better headspace. So I certainly think he's got a career at Spurs. And, even if it's not a little bit similar to Lo Celso, maybe Spurs go and sign someone in the summer in terms of a forward. And Richarlison is the backup. He's still going to play a lot of games, with what Ange wants to be doing in terms of going for it in Europe, going for it in the Premier League, going for it in the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. So I don't, unless someone from the Saudi League is going to come in with a huge bid, or potentially the romantic side of it, Real Madrid come in with big money. If Richarlison's a brilliant end to the season, Real Madrid want another Brazilian number 9. That's always been one that you can maybe see happening, but Spurs signed Richarlison for 60 million. They're not going to sell him for anything less than that. And that's a lot of money for, even for the Saudi clubs, it's still a lot of money. I don't think off the top of my head they were paying that type of money, for Benzema or for Firmino. I don't think it was anywhere near that bracket. I know they have spent a lot of money, but it's not been, that to that extent. So I think Richarlison will still be at Spurs, come next season, and I'm pleased for him actually. He obviously had a torrid time last year, but probably in hindsight should have had this operation done a lot earlier rather than playing on. But he deserves credit for that. He was trying to play on to help the team because he's so desperate to do well, and I don't think he kind of was given enough advice in terms of his body and managing his body and knowing the pain threshold that he should and shouldn't be playing with. So I'm pleased that he's starting to show his worth, and he's never going to be Harry Kane, but I think he has a lot of qualities that will do well in an Ange team. So yeah, I don't personally see him being one that's going to be sold in the summer. I think he's going to be around for, maybe not the long haul in terms of the next 3-4 years, but I certainly think he's going to be one of our forward options for the next couple of seasons.
George, last couple of names. Jared Braithwaite seems to be linked with Tottenham a lot. Everton centre-back. Lloyd Kelly of Bournemouth. Of course, his contract is running down. Hayden Hackney of Middlesbrough. Adam Walton of Blackburn. João Gomez of Wolves has been linked with Spurs recently. Jonathan Rowe of Norwich. And Casey McAteer of Leicester. Any of those you fancy?
Yeah, Lloyd Kelly's an interesting one. really, really good player, and really, really good character from everything I've heard about him, actually. And yeah, he's gonna, it sounds like he's gonna be leaving Bournemouth at the end of the season. I mean, he's left. I believe he's left. Yeah, I think he's left-footed, and he's definitely capable of playing left back or centre back. I think that'd be a really smart one for Spurs, especially another homegrown player. That's always an issue. So I could definitely see that one having legs. And yeah, I've seen the Branthwaite links for quite a while, actually. I think he'll probably leave Everton at some point over the next year, probably because of their issues, whether it's because they've got relegated or not. I'm not sure. I don't think personally that I would see him. I don't think Spurs would pay the price for him, if you know what I mean. And also when you look at, there's a lot of people at the minute that are very excited about Ashley Phillips, and also Alfie Dorrington as well. Understandably so, because they're two really, really exciting players that Spurs have got. But when you look at them, they're both 18, and Jared's 20, either 20 or 21, and he's only just now got into the Everton first team. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, chuck Alfie in, chuck Ash in, give him a chance." Very hard position to chuck a young kid in. But Jared's kind of done it the right way, bided his time, went on loan, come back, and now he's in the Everton first team. And I think Spurs have also got to be careful of not blocking up those pathways. And, maybe Ash Phillips won't make it, maybe Alfie Dorrington won't make it, but I think they've both done enough over the last 6 months to probably warrant being the sixth kind of centre-back. If you include Ben Davies in that, if you include Dragos and another centre-back that's going to come in. So I think, I'd be reluctant to be spending a lot of money on that position, given Spurs have already done that with Romario, with Mickey van der Ven, with Dragos. So that's why I think Lloyd Kelly makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the other names you mentioned, I've seen the Hackney and the Wharton links. A little bit similar. I suppose clearly want a centre midfielder, and that's why Conor Gallagher's the big one being linked. And they definitely will get a centre midfielder, but I don't know about Wharton and Hackney. I kind of look at Alfie Devine in a similar kind of situation. Like, this is a kid that's clearly really, really, really talented, done amazingly at Port Vale. On his debut, scored a penalty in the 97th minute. That already shows the type of character and an elite mentality he's got. So I'm a little bit reticent to say, let's go for Wharton, let's go for Hackney, two young, English midfielders, and block Alfie Devine's pathway. I think probably that would have happened previously. I think Spurs are a lot more joined up now, as I was kind of talking about before with the structure, that I think that they'll look at that. If you sign Conor Gallagher, it's a different story. That's a guy that's going to come bang into the first team, and maybe in 18 months, Alfie Devine's ready to push, or maybe 2 years, Alfie Devine's ready to push Conor Gallagher, and then you've got real competition. But if you sign a Wharton or a Hackney, you're straight away putting him above Alfie Devine in the pecking order, and maybe we don't know how much of a difference there is between those guys. So I'm not as certain on those two. Clearly, there's interest from Spurs. Spurs have always traditionally been in for the best EFL players, Championship players, League One players, and they clearly will be watching these guys. And the same with Jonathan Rowe. But it's kind of, if Spurs sign Noosa, I don't think they're going to sign Jonathan Rowe. It's kind of one of those situations. But I think for this month, it feels like all the eggs are in the basket with Noosa. And I think, put my neck on the line, I think Spurs probably will get that deal done. It's just a case of, getting the finer details, bringing that fee down, because they're not going to want to pay a real huge amount for an 18-year-old. But there's enough potential there to probably warrant a 25 million deal.
George, if you gave me two numbers, one number for the amount of players you think the Spurs will sign from now until the end of the window, and how many players you think will go out the window.
So one in, be Noosa. How many would go out? So I'd say Brian Hill. I think Sessegnon I think there could be a bit of movement with Sessegnon personally.
Is there interest in him?
I think there's interest. It's kind of, I don't believe he's fit yet. So there's going to be a lot of to-in and throwing over who's, if anyone does come in from what sort of level is he willing to go to. He had a really good loan at Hoffenheim a few years ago, and there was interest in him in the summer. If he hadn't had this kind of setback with his hamstring injury, I think he would have gone on loan in the summer. I think if I'm pressed, I'd say news will happen, and I think Brian Hill will go out. I think Sessegnon probably will go out, but I don't think Højbjerg will. I think Højbjerg will stay, and I think that'll probably be it.
George, can I just ask you very quickly about the under-21s, because it's worth noting as well as the Spurs first team, the men's team has had a great season so far. The under-18s, the under-21s, and of course the Spurs women, who you follow, a lot this season under Robert Villahamn, they've had a great season. Of course, they've now equalled the points tally on Sunday to last season already. So, but the under-21 players, Donnelly, Dorrington and Sunsut Bell, to name three, is it worth sending those out on loan to get any experience? Because the under-21s have done so well, winning every single Premier League 2 game. Are they going to get game time under Ange Postecoglou from now until the end of the season with all of these players coming back?
I think Sunsut Bell, yeah, I think he probably will go out. No, I've been told Alfie Dorrington and Jamie won't. I think, there's clearly interest in those two guys, really, really talented players. Jamie's played for the first team a little bit, but, him and Alfie have been real mainstays of that under-21 team. I think the issue with those guys, especially with, Ash Phillips going out, and even though Dane Scarlett's come back, I think you just kind of need Donnelly around and Dorrington around as kind of bodies. Dorrington at the minute will be, 5th, 6th draw centre back, but it only takes one injury and all of a sudden he's bumped up, and then takes a second injury, as we've seen with Romero being out for 3 games and Mickey van der Ven doing his hamstring. All of a sudden you're playing a back, fullbacks there, and you don't really want to put Alfie Dorrington in yet because he's such a young lad and it's a hard position. But you do also need someone there. So that's probably why Spurs are keeping hold of him, and also it's good for them to be in around the first team. That was certainly probably benefited Alfie Devine last year. Actually, I kind of felt Alfie Devine should have gone on loan last year, but actually it probably benefited him having a whole season with elite level footballers. Whether the football on the pitch is great in terms of how it was under Antonio and others, it's still great to them be around. And you've also got to remember their age. They are young. They're only 18, soon to be 19 in a couple of their cases. So, that they have got time still on their hands. And I think probably next season, it'll be hand-picked. It'll be very, very, specifically picked a club for them where they'll go and have a really good time, like we've seen with Alfie Devine this season. So now I think I understand the calls to get them out, get them on loan, but Spurs do need enough bodies around the place, especially if someone like Brian Hill, for example, does go out.
George, just very lastly, talk a little bit about the Spurs women, because of course Spurs women made history this season. Only a short while ago, a couple of weeks ago, beating Arsenal at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, the first ever North London victory. That was a hell of a game and hell of a sight in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Robert Villahamn, of course, was very happy, but they seem to be a very, very different team this season, don't they?
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's Ange Ball 0.2, isn't it? Really, Rob Ball. I think we were sort of debating in the press box after that Arsenal game. Unbelievable result, and obviously a brilliant goal as well. Yeah, it's really exciting what the women's team are doing and what Robert's doing there. Plenty of help as well. Vicky Jepson's still part of that team. She was one that kept Spurs up in the end last season, and she's stuck around and is a big part of it. And they've made some really exciting signings as well. Grace Clinton scored twice last weekend, and I think Spurs would love to keep her, and that'll be a big one that they'll be trying to look at, I reckon, over the next 6 months. How can we keep Grace Clinton, because she's such a big talent. And they've not had Bethany England for the whole season, really. They've just got her back. She's got a couple against Sheffield United the other week. And they've got a decent FA Cup run, actually. Got Cheltenham in the next round, which I believe is the 5th round, I think, off the top of my head. So if they win that, they'll be through to the quarterfinals. And given they beat Arsenal, they'll fancy their chances against anyone. And they're level on points with they're sixth for the minute in the WSL, but level on points with both United and Liverpool. So, Spurs finished fifth a couple of years ago and had a really good season, but couldn't kick on under Rian Skinner. Whereas it feels like there's a lot more in place now at Spurs, and the Daniel Levy and the board showed their backing for it when they signed Bethany England last January for a real hefty fee. So that showed their kind of commitment and willingness to back him. So it could be really exciting times for both the men's team and the women's team, really, if they sort of carry on playing the style of football. But yeah, the football's very similar to Ange. Clearly, deliberately Spurs have decided they want people that fit the Tottenham DNA, and people can laugh about that, can jest, whatever you want, but Spurs traditionally have always been an attacking team, and now the men's team and the women's team both have managers that fit that philosophy as well.
Exciting times ahead, as you say, George. George, you've been an absolutely wonderful guest. Don't leave it so long before you come back on this channel again. Please tell everyone where they can find you and your wonderful work.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I don't know if you want to follow my tweets, but at George Sessions on Twitter. And then, my work goes, as Chris said at the start, it does go here far and wide. Normally the Independent and Yahoo are the ones I'm tweeting out, though, because they actually put my name on it, and I do have a little bit of an ego, so I like to see that. But no, thanks for having me on. It's been good fun, and hopefully next time I'm on, we're talking about an FA Cup winning team. Fingers crossed.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, talking about trophy wins, that'd be fantastic. It's been far too long, George. Well, George, enjoy the game on Friday. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening, and until the next one, come on, you Spurs.